Okay, it's recording. So this is the default kind of home screen of After Effects. Before we go any further, I'll say that thing that I always say when I'm looking at Adobe products, which is there's these windows all around the software, and you may or may not be able to see the same ones as me. There are going to be moments where we use some of these windows today, and if you can't see a window that I'm looking at, it probably means that it's not ticked here. This is the same for Premiere. I don't know if you can see the screen okay, but it might help if we turn off the lights. Actually, we can turn the lights off at the front row. It's all right? Okay, cool. So yeah, there's these little tabs, and the same with any Adobe software. It can be a bit fiddly sometimes, just basically managing where they appear, because you can completely customize where everything is in everything Adobe. So there's actually a shortcut, Command W, that I love to use in Premiere that closes these panels one at a time if they're getting too cluttered. But yeah, we're going to be using the tracker today. We're going to be doing some tracking, and we're going to be using our effects search window here for a couple of effects, and we'll be using the character one as well to change how the text appears. So to start off with, let's just go new composition, and we're going to go with the default. It's just going to name it comp 1. We should probably get into the habit of naming our compositions, so I'll just name this simple lower third. And there we go. So you may or may not get the view that I'm getting here, which is where you get like a massive chessboard. That's because the transparency grid button can be enabled and disabled here. And this is really important. Does anyone know what this does? So this shows you the portion of the composition that is transparent. So actually the whole thing is transparent right now. In other words, this isn't like black solid color. It's just a transparent nothingness. So there's nothing here in the composition, because we can prove that by turning on the transparency. So it's really important to know that, because transparency is going to allow the underlying video to be seen. So if we make something here that only covers a little portion of this screen, we can drop that asset over a video. It's going to reveal the video underneath. So transparency is everything underneath or behind whatever it is that you're doing. So just to really emphasize what this is, we're going to make a lower third. So we're going to start off on our rectangle tool up here. We can reach that by pressing Q as well. And we're going to just draw a rectangle shape here, and it's going to create a shape layer like that. For those on the recording as well, I'm going to be going fairly slowly so I can have regular coffee and water breaks, because I've got a sore throat, not COVID related. So I'm going to, at the top, I'm going to click on fill and make it a white rectangle. And there's going to be no stroke. So if I double click it or single click it, it should have like a red line to indicate that there's no stroke. It's just a white fill with no stroke. Hopefully you're all good. Maybe just ask a question if anyone's stuck, or you can maybe check on your neighbor as well to see how they're doing it.
So how do you make it no stroke?
You can click on the word stroke, and you get stroke options. Same for the fill. So we've drawn the rectangle. That's all good, and we're going to use a shortcut here, which is Y, which is pan behind anchor point tool. So if we press Y, it'll switch to that. And we could press Q to go back to the rectangle. So shortcuts are nice and they're useful because they save you from fishing around too much with the mouse. So the Y tool, you can see on the screen what happens when you press the Y tool. There's this kind of point on the screen that actually moves towards the rectangle because the Y tool allows you to change the anchor point. So here's the anchor point when we have the Y tool selected, and we're going to actually move it to the right side of the rectangle. So this is the anchor point for this shape layer, and we can set it specifically to that shape layer. And that just means that when we scale things up and down, it's actually going to scale from this anchor point. So every layer can have its own anchor point. And now, when we press S to actually scale it, it should, let's just deselect this little link button because we don't want to necessarily scale it on both axes. We would just want to scale it one way. I might need to just refine that anchor point. Okay, so sometimes the anchor point isn't like set properly. So it's actually this big anchor point here on the right of the rectangle. And if you delink the scale, you should be able to have it move just from one side. So I'm going to set it to 0. And it's good to get into the habit of typing in values because then they're exactly what you want them to be. So I've got it scaled from nothing here, and the cursor is at the start of the composition. So I'm going to hit the stopwatch here, which is going to enter in a keyframe. I entered the value. It's really hard to see a lot of this stuff, but I entered 0 on the scale. So by pressing S on the layer, you get 100%, 100%, and just delink them and select 0, and hopefully it's going to scale from where the anchor point is being set. And we can go down the timeline. This composition length isn't particularly long, so I might need to change that. If I go into composition settings, just have a look at how long. So command clicking the time code or the frames on the timeline will change the view to seconds, so that's a lot easier to see that. And now we're just going to select the keyframes, and we can make them ease, which helps them move more smoothly. So F9 is a shortcut, but it doesn't always work because, just so you're aware, I'm a Windows person, of course, but on Macs there is a thing with the keyboard where the function keys don't always work because they're set to work for the Apple, like, you know, the brightness and the volume and etc. But you can actually make them standard function keys if you wanted to here, which is useful because then I can press F9, but I'm just showing you that as an aside. So I can just kind of select these keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease, and then there is a nicer sense of motion to that movement. It kind of looks more professional, more smooth. And we can enable motion blur as well, which is a kind of motion blur that represents how we see, because if things don't have motion blur, they look maybe unnaturally sharp. So a bit of motion blur helps. It just kind of helps the actual edge of the movement seem a bit more normal to human vision anyway. Okay, so far so good. Which bit are you stuck on?
I my shape is not changed.
So, the stopwatch is a bit fiddly, but let me go back and let's say we're at the stage where you've drawn you've got the shape in at 0%, and then if you go down the timeline, and okay, so sorry. First of all, make sure that the stopwatch button is hit, so you get the diamond shape on the timeline. Yeah. So when you go down the timeline, you can actually there's two different ways of doing it. You should be able to just enter in 100, and it should automatically punch in another diamond for you. Alternatively, you can actually hit the diamond shape over here, which adds or removes a keyframe. And this is good to know about anyway, because this allows you to move by keyframes one at a time. So if you don't have, if it's not like growing on the second keyframe, just navigate to that second keyframe using the arrows, and then just enter that value, and it should, hopefully.
Stupid question. How can you, once you've got your keyframe, can you just select it and move it down the timeline?
Yeah, you can go into the graph editor, and you can really play with the keyframes in terms of how they appear, how they behave, all that sort of thing. So that's quite a lot of fun. For example, you can change the way that it eases. Like you can have it move in pretty quick, and then like kind of chill out afterwards. So like that. It really is up to you how you want to have it ease in. But the default way of easing it in, which is F9, or you can right click on them and say Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. You should get a nice smooth kind of fade in. Okay, so we're going to a very common thing, it seems, for graphic designers and also sound designers is to duplicate things and mess with the duplicated version. So with the layer selected here, I'm going to duplicate it. Any guesses as to what the shortcut might be for duplicate? Command D, well done. So now we've got shape layer 2. We're going to press Y on this one. And let's just go to the second keyframe. And I'm going to press Y on that second shape layer. And this time I'm going to move the anchor to the other side, to the left side.
You select all three keyframes and shape.
Yeah, so let me just go back and do that again. I'm going to Command D, duplicate the shape layer. Now the shape layer 2 is selected. Press Y. I'm going to move the anchor point to the left side because I want this one to move in a different way. But I'm going to, I need to make sure that I'm actually, well, I don't really need to worry about too much right now about where I am on the timeline. So I'm going to go over here and bring the anchor point to the left side. And I'm going to change the color of the rectangle by going into Contents, Rectangle, Fill. And I'm going to make it a nice red wine color because I love red wine. It's I never had any interest in it when I was younger, but you know, joys of getting a bit older is you discover new things in life, eh? And red wine is one of them for me. Oop. Cool. Okay, so we're going to move. Let's see. What should we do? We're going to move the red wine one. Let's just go back to the V tool so that we can do that. I'm going to move the red wine one down. So go jump, jump. And there's a bit of like, you might call it basic editing on the timeline that you can do to make sure that you don't have any kind of gaps or anything. And we're going to press U on, let's just see. Well, we're basically going to bring in the red one from the other direction and do the same thing, just keyframe it in the other direction. Okay, I'll just give you a moment to get there. So you have one going in one way and the other one coming in the other way. U, by the way, is the shortcut to reveal any keyframes that you've got going on, which is really useful to remember. If you ever get lost as to where your keyframes are, you can always just press U and you can keep pressing it and it will show you where those keyframes live in there.
For some reason, on my content side, I can see that I've got two rectangles, but I don't see it on the timeline. I only have one object on the timeline.
Did you duplicate the layer?
Oh no, so in the same layer I've got two rectangles now. Oh, so and one's that layer. Okay, so how do you take this? So Command D. Even though it's not selected, we've selected the layer. Oh, Command D. Oh, okay. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's all quite fiddly in After Effects. And I think the main thing that goes wrong is just that when you're doing something, you don't have the right thing selected. And I feel that pain massively in Photoshop because I'm not a designer necessarily. So I'm kind of very much fairly fresh to all this kind of stuff as well. But for me, it's just like not having, I mean, it's easy when you know, isn't it? But not having the right thing selected can be a bit painful. Okay, cool. Let's get the text tool on the go. And we're going to just write some text on here. No, not for now. I mean, we can always kind of tweak.
Drag it,
Yeah. Just make sure you've got the text selected. And then with the character window open, you should be able to change the color of the text and the size of the text, etc. Well, Command and A is really useful shortcut because oftentimes you just don't have all the text selected. So as you can see, it's quite easy to make a mistake and only partially select the text. You're going to think I'm a wino after this. But you know, it helps to have some idea of what we're doing. And we can use V as well to reposition things once we've written them on. So using shortcuts is great, and I always teach my editors using Premiere to always have their index finger on V in the what I call the home position, because you wouldn't believe, like, you see people learning, you know, with their left hand on their smartphone or on their coffee, and you just see them struggle for many months before they kind of use both of their hands at once. It's kind of like it's like if I was to learn something that I'm not very good at, like if I was to try and learn sewing with one hand or learn knitting with one hand, that would be an absolute nightmare for me. Bad enough with two hands. Well, chunky farmer hands. So there's a bit of there's something not quite perfect about what I've done. And you can see these little mistakes, but it's actually not the worst little problem. But I've got some movement, something kind of strange is going on my wine-colored layer. That I would probably do well to fix, but I'm going to just crack on for now. So we've got some text on there now, and we can of course move the text with the arrow tool, or we can actually click on the text and press the P key, and we can change its position there if you prefer to do it that way, but it's the same deal. So what we're going to do now is we're going to keyframe the text so it comes in from the side. We're going to do that after the kind of wine color is fully established on the screen. So you're probably getting the hang of this now. What we're going to do is we're going to press the stopwatch button on the text layer. Then I'm going to use the position let's see, what would look better? Maybe it would look cool if it just kind of came up from the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to put it here so that it's outside of the lower third. And then we can scrub down a bit and we can put it in the lower third. So it's going to kind of jump into the lower third. But in order for it to look cool and tidy, we need to apply a mask onto it. And this is really the cornerstone of how you do a lot of text reveal sort of stuff that people are always asking me how you do it. So I'll just turn on the motion blur for the text just so that it moves in a slightly more naturalistic way. It's very slow, so I'll make it a bit faster. But obviously, as you can see, it looks silly because we can see it coming in off the side, and it looks quite lame. So what we can do is we can do like a pre-composition. So a pre-composition is kind of like making a composition of a layer, and you can do that in Premiere as well. So have you ever heard of nested video in Premiere? When you nest or when you pre-compose something, I know it's like a fancy word, but all it means is you're just wrapping up that thing in a wrapper. And you can wrap up a load of elements into a pre-composition, or just one. But once you've got it kind of wrapped up as a pre-composition, you can kind of treat it slightly differently than if it was an individual element or a layer. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to pre-compose it, and we're going to mask it because it's easier to do masks on pre-compositions because they're treated differently as compositions. So bear with me, but we'll just go with it. Just want to make sure that you're all ready for the next step.
I don't have the stopwatch on my text.
You don't have the stopwatch on your text layer. Okay, so
Where is the text?
so first of all, select T to select the text tool, draw some text on the lower third, and then select the text layer on the timeline and press P for position, and then the stopwatch should appear. So you should only have to press the stopwatch once, because once you press it once, you can then enter a value, move the cursor, enter a second value, and it should just keyframe the second value automatically. But if you want to, you can always do it yourself by pressing in these little diamonds instead, and then whatever current value it's at will be captured as a keyframe. It's the same in Premiere. It's a bit fiddly in Premiere. And before I forget to say it, you can use page up and page down as well, which will jump at 1 frame intervals. Or if you introduce the shift key, it will go 5 frames at a time. This is quite nice as well because it helps you make frame by frame adjustments. So anyway, just before we go on to the next step, just want to make sure everyone's got something like this on the go. Otherwise I can come and maybe help you out. so far we've just been keyframing the scale by using anchor points and the position of the text. But now we're going to reveal the text using a mask, and this is like a key concept. So it's pretty straightforward. So I'll show you how to do it. Let's just right click on those keyframes and make them easy ease, keyframe assistant easy ease. Okay, I'm going to right click on the text layer, and there's an option called pre-compose. And you can name the pre-composition. So this is just wine text, so I'll just name it that. But it could be many different things in a pre-composition.
Wait, so I just missed how you found that pre-composition window.
Yeah, that's just a right click on the text layer, pre-compose. Yeah. So now the text layer has turned into its own composition, as we can tell by the icon beside the text wine text. So it's its own composition now. So now the joy of it being its own composition is that when we go back onto the Q tool, which is a rectangle tool, mine's gone to a polygon because I pressed it repeatedly, but I'm going to put it back to a rectangle. Now, if you draw the rectangle over a composition, it becomes a mask tool. So check this out. I can now draw over the composition, but instead of drawing a rectangle, it's actually a mask. So this is now a mask. So I've put a mask on the text composition. So I'm controlling its visibility around a mask border. Alrighty. Zoom. And a lot of graphics that you see on videos, they're really just some combination of keyframing and masking, and usually they reverse a layer and they bring it in another way and they change the color, that kind of thing. And I should remind you as well that if I press the transparency button, we can see that we're only making a little strap or a lower third, whatever you want to call it. If you're really old school, you'll call it an Aston strap, but you'd need to be above a certain age to call it that, I think. So I'm going to shorten this composition to be around 10. I should say shorten the elements to be around 10 seconds long, not the composition. So it's about 10 seconds long. And same for the text, because it's actually made the text the entire length of the composition. So I'm just going to shorten those all to the 10-second mark. Make sure they're bang on 10 seconds. There's a shortcut, another really useful shortcut that, again, I'm always getting my Premiere editors to use, and that is the combination of Alt and mouse wheel. It's absolutely essential for anyone in an editing program, because zooming is such a headache without this method. And you don't want to spend your whole time zooming around by clicking on this horrible little thing down here and doing all this stuff. You should be able to zoom dynamically by holding Alt and mouse wheeling in and out of the bit of the timeline you want to see better. So if you Alt and mouse wheel all the way out, you can see the full length of the timeline, for example, which I might just shorten to make it around a minute long, because 6 minutes is a bit insanely long. So there we go. It's a bit easier to deal with that. All right, so don't worry if you don't quite have what I've got. It really doesn't matter. It's more just about you getting the concepts. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a composition out of all of these layers, and I'm going to duplicate it and make it reverse, so that it generates exactly as it has here, but it kind of does the exact same for the next 10 seconds in reverse. So it comes in and then it goes out the exact same way that it comes in. So yeah, I'm going to select all 3 layers, and I'll just tidy this up by pressing U, just to show you that I've only got 3 layers. 2 of them are shapes and one of them is a text layer. that's been made into a composition. So I've only got 3 layers. So you can select them by marqueing them or by just going Command A. Of course, I'm sure you would be able to guess. And with all 3 of them selected, I'm going to do the same thing. Right click and say pre-compose. And I've got all layers there. I might just call it all layers or whatever, lower third. And now it buries all of this stuff inside one composition called all layers. And if I double click that, I can still see the contents of that. So it's not like it's destroying anything, it's still there. But it just means I can treat it all as one layer. Okay. Can you see okay? Would you prefer if I turn the lights off for the front? It might make it a bit easier. I'll try it.
What happens if...
Okay, so there's some sort of composition on the timeline here. I'm going to use my page up and page down keys to just really bang on the last frame of that appearing on the screen. And then I'm going to use a shortcut here, which is Alt hard bracket right. I don't know how you describe that, but it's the button just to the upper left of the Enter key. So I'm going to press Alt. It says volume plus 1 dB because that's what it does in Premiere. Alt, right bracket. And that actually is really nice. It just tails the layer to where the cursor is. And I'm going to duplicate again here, Command D. So I've got the same thing twice. And I'm going to select both compositions, right click, and in the keyframe assistant, sequence layers. What this will do will basically be, well, I'll just show you, it'll be easier to just press it. And it kind of makes them symmetrical, if you like. So here we go. I'll just do that again. So hopefully you've got the same thing twice. We duplicated it, and we select both compositions, right click, and it's keyframe assistant, sequence layers. All that does is it basically puts the layers in consecutive order, whatever. And we're going to right click the second one, just the second one, and we're going to go time reverse layer. And that's it. And now it comes in, it's duplicated and perfectly positioned exactly from the last frame of the first one, goes into the second one in reverse and goes out the way that it came.
Could it, I might have pressed the wrong button, but I've deleted my first pre-comp and now there's only the other one.
If
I pressed Alt bracket, could I...
So Alt, let me just come back to where you are. You should be here. And I named mine all layers. And if I go inside, I can see it's got 2 shape layers and 1 wine text composition layer. And I've navigated the cursor to the 10-second point. I'm going to use my up and down, page up, page down to just really make sure that I've got the last frame. And with that layer selected, I should be able to just go Alt bracket. And then I duplicate, select both of them, keyframe assistant, sequence layers, select just the second one, whoops, not double click it, time reverse layer, and that's it. I'm gonna try and push on because there's a fair bit of. I'm slightly torn here between, do I try and show you more, which might be more painful, or do I just go slow, really slow? Because it is fiddly, and there's a lot of like little things in After Effects that are, you know, click this and click that and select this, and it's a bit painful, but knowing the general concept, I think, is the most valuable. So I'm going to move this marker here to the end of the composition. And a nice trick is you can just right click on the ruler and you can say trim comp to work area. And you can see that I've got a 20-second composition in total. So you can always have bigger compositions than what you need, and then you can kind of trim them down afterwards. Okay, so I mentioned about the alpha, the transparency. We need to know what's transparent in the composition, which is most of this, other than what we expect, which is our little welcome to the wine show thing. And that's really useful to know that and to check that. So I'm going to go to composition, add to render queue. This is how we actually render something off. And it says lossless here, and this is a bit different to the way it looks in Premiere. It's a bit more kind of clinical, and yeah, it's not so reassuring, but this is where we select the output format, and it works perfectly. It just looks different to what we're used to. So we can click here where it says output module lossless, and here, well, QuickTime is probably the format to go with, but here where it says video output channels, that should be red, green, and blue plus alpha. Because if it's not plus alpha, well, guess what? It's going to not respect the transparency, and it's just going to make it black. So if we put that over a video, it's going to completely cover it. Whereas if we set it to be plus alpha, then in Premiere, I can bring this in and put it over a video, and it's going to let the video underneath be visible. Does that make sense? And you can click here and you can specify where it goes. So I'm going to put mine into the folder that I asked you to make in your own part of the server. Press render, and maybe I can just show you that in Premiere. Because it's got the alpha channel, well, actually, I should be able to show you that in After Effects. If I bring in a video, for example, whoops. If I bring in a video, I don't normally use After Effects for video editing, but yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, right? You can see that all this stuff here is where the transparency was. All right, so let's get rid of this. Close project. Don't save because it's not that good. And we get back here again, and we can go new composition. We're going to just press OK. We're going to start playing with a bit of video here. So we're going to start off with kind of like 2D text moving with the video. So I just got back from Istanbul. It's an amazing place, very interesting. Not my favorite place in Turkey, but anyways, I just went online and downloaded a video of Istanbul in one of the streets that, one of the many streets they have where you're walking down an alley and there's people trying to sell you things, all sorts of nice food everywhere. So I'm just going to go with this for now. Drag in the Istanbul video. And we can actually generate a composition from the shot, which is always a good idea. If we don't have a composition in there, there's different ways to do it. We can right-click it, and we can say New Comp from Selection, or some people sometimes drag it down onto the New Comp button. But either way, it'll make a new composition that will have the same settings as the video in terms of frame rate and resolution. So it's kind of good to know that, rather than trying to drop it in on a composition that might not have the same settings. Okay, so we're going to create here a new null object. And a null is just kind of like how to describe, it's kind of like an object that you can manipulate that's not necessarily visible, but it's like a latch point. It's a bit like an anchor. We can use it to sort of move things around without that null being visible on the screen. So we've made a new null, and we're going to go to the start of the timeline. We've got a null and our video. Hopefully you guys are all with me. We're going to select the video layer, and now we're going to use the tracker window. So make sure the tracker window is enabled. We're going to press track motion. And we get this little tracking point. Again, it's a bit fiddly, and Command Z, which is undo, is our friend when we make mistakes. But we should be able to click that and move it around the screen. And we can also mouse in, and it's easier to move. So when we move it properly, we can see that we get the ability to pinpoint pixels on the screen. And if I just play this video, just to kind of, let's just talk about what we're doing here. I'm sure you've all seen this, but what we're going to do here is make a bit of text that kind of moves with some element in the video. A text that maybe describes something. I'm sure you've seen this on, like, on BBC programs where, or whatever, scientific documentaries, whatever. So maybe we'll put a little sign here that says what the name of the shop is, or maybe says the location or whatever. So that might be a good thing to try, because the sign is relatively unimpeded by people. And if we look at the video as well, there's actually a sign here, and there's a light here, so maybe that might be a good place to try and target. Okay, so I'm going to try and target this here, which is a high contrast area, because that's quite dark and this surround is quite bright. So back to the very start of the video, I'm going to move this tracking point to that tiny little black dot there. And yeah, you can actually change the size of, you can make it try and focus a bit more narrowly there, and it might help the track succeed. And this is the outer tracking point. You can kind of play with that if the accuracy of the tracking isn't very good. And now we're just going to go to analyze, play. Let me just zoom out first so we can see. Analyze, play, and it attempts to track, and ooh, it's kind of failing a bit, so I might try and refine that. It's not worked very well. Yeah, it's not been a very smooth track, so I'm going to reset that. Back to the start, and maybe choose a more sensible tracking point. Why don't I just go for the little Vodafone thing? That's perfect, isn't it? Hopefully that will work a bit better. Play.
Once you've selected what you want to tap, you press enter, or you don't press anything.
Once you've selected what you want to track, I'm pressing the Analyze Play button in the tracker window,
Okay.
and that's where you manage that. So this is tracked pretty well, and it kind of falls apart here, obviously because the sign disappears. But it's enough for us to have a play with, I think. So that's all good. And I'm going to now go to the Edit Target button here. And this is where the null comes in. So apply the tracking motion to the null layer. This enables the null to understand that tracking from the tracker And we can obviously link the null layers to other things like text, and it'll all move together. So the null layer is the glue that moves, that we can attach text and icons or whatever to that. So we're going to apply the motion to the null layer. And I sometimes forget to do this, but we need to actually press apply after we've done that, because we're applying the tracker effect. Press apply, just hit OK. And then we have a null layer that has the tracking applied to it. So we can basically attach anything to that null layer. So why don't we try typing in some text now, just saying I don't know, best shop in Istanbul. And again, I'm not a graphic designer, but I might want to think about making the color kind of pop out somehow. Maybe giving it a bit of a border. It's really not great looking. But yeah, I can basically draw things on as well. So if with nothing else selected, I can maybe draw on a rectangle or something, and again make that the same color. I'm going to remove the text border because it looks terrible. So hopefully you've got some text and or some sort of a shape that we can actually attach to the null now, because we've got those text elements in there. We've got the track on the null, but they're not connected yet. So we need to do that. Otherwise the text just doesn't understand the tracking. So we're going to select the text layer and the shape layer. In my case, I've got a little shape. I might just refine the shape. It's not. Whoops.
My shape layer is acting like a mask. Is that normal?
If your shape layer is acting like a mask, that means you probably had something selected before you clicked on the rectangle tool, because it's important to deselect everything first. Otherwise, it's the number one thing that goes wrong with After Effects. Basically, things go wrong due to something being selected that shouldn't be, or nothing being selected when there should be before you go and do something, and it happens to me all the time. So yeah, we're going to select the text and the shape layer together by using Command click, and then we're going to right click and just pre-compose those two. So I might call this moving elements, for example. And we can move these around by obviously just clicking and moving it, but it moves the whole composition. Let's just attach it first to the null. To do that, we use this little pick whip. Don't know if you can see that. It's like a cool, like kind of like a pagan little sign on the layer. And we can pick whip one layer to another layer. So the null does move. So if we pick whip the text to the null, the text does move with the tracking that we entered. It's just that we didn't really position it very well. So I might just get rid of the shape layer. It's a bit distracting, and just keep this about the text. If I press A on the text, I can reposition it, and I can do this after I pick whip it or before. So let's pick whip just the text to the null, and then we'll walk down the street, and we can see that, you know, the text kind of gets in the way of people. So maybe it makes sense to press A for anchor and change the anchor of the text and maybe move it to the side or something, so that it doesn't kind of block the people as we approach it. So maybe not the best thing to track because it's a sign on the ground, so we're not really getting. Ideally, this would be a shot that kind of pans to the side. That would be a much nicer example, I think, of how to do this. So apologies, I maybe should have had a different video set for this. But the idea is exactly the same. That is basically how. And then around about here, perhaps you might decide to press O or change the opacity at that point if it is a pre-compose.
Can you keyframe that text?
Yes, you can keyframe the text to fade in or fade out, or you can put effects on it. So, for example, there is text effects. Yeah, maybe I'm not going to get into that. But if you were to drag an effect onto the layer, depending on obviously where it is when you drag it on, so like here, it'll just dissolve from that point onwards, because we don't want to see the text after the sign has already left the screen, because it looks weird. I mean, it looks weird anyway because it's not a very good example, but that's the idea basically of how to do it. So that in mind, we'll move on to maybe do more interesting stuff and maybe make the text look a bit more 3D, because this is very kind of like 2D, just looks a bit weird. There's too much stuff on the screen anyways for us to read this very well. So it's not a great, perhaps, little clip to use this on, but the idea works really well when you've got particularly horizontal movements and you've got less stuff in the frame, because there's a lot of stuff in the frame. We could help it stand out perhaps by making a background, you know, by drawing on a shape and having it underneath and making that part of the composition. But yeah, I'm going to move on now to more kind of 3D-ish stuff. So I'm going to just basically close all that. I know it feels like you're closing a lot of work when you do that, but it's okay. We're going to make another comp here. And this time we're going to use the 3D camera tracker. And this is an effect. So I need to search for this. And this one's a lot of fun. So I'm going to drag that effect. I can just drag it onto the video. And it's going to need a few minutes to do this.
3D camera.
Yeah, so it's an effect called 3D camera tracker. And what it's going to do is scan the video and try and make a load of points in the video that kind of build up a 3D world from the flat screen image. So it does take a bit of time to do this. It doesn't seem to be going.
I'm getting this message. Adobe Effects would like to access your files on desktop.
Okay.
So I should just say okay.
Have you got? Yeah, it sounds to me like you've got the. You're working from the desktop of these computers, which is not advisable because. Well, it depends what you're doing, but we try and teach our students to not work from the computers, like, because it's not safe to work from computers. So you always want to work from a server or from a external hard drive that's backed up.
On your computer at home.
So just as an aside, this laptop here, for example, it just looks like it is just a standard laptop, but basically I've spent this is really geeky, but I've spent years getting things to work in this laptop in a way that I like to work, installing niche kind of plugins and all that sort of thing, and I can't take the risk of this laptop breaking. That would just be devastating. So what I would do, for example, is take a system image of this laptop. It's quite easy to do. Windows has this built in. It just takes 5 minutes, and you can clone the entire disk image. So I've got this laptop, I could throw this out the window and it would get ran over, and I wouldn't be that bothered about it other than the monetary value of the laptop, because it's all your work. That's what you spend your life and your time doing. All of that stuff is what is important, and you don't ever want to have a single point of failure. You always want redundancy in systems. And the same thing applies to, if you do, I used to do live events, and we had 2 of everything. We had 2 networks. We were running live sound, and we were using a network to kind of host the live audio, and we had 2 networks set up. Redundancy is, when you're dealing with technology, you never want to be vulnerable with just one single point of failure. You always want to have everything backed up or duplicated, and that could be your work, or it could be your entire computer, because things go wrong, accidents happen, people steal stuff, sadly. So always have everything backed up.
System image.
Yeah, system image. And think about crypto, for example. People have their crypto on special keys, and then they have the password somewhere else. It's all about what systems have you got in place to protect your time and your money. So whatever's valuable to you, you should spend time protecting that to make sure that no one can take that away from you, or your own forgetfulness or whatever, because I'm very forgetful, whatever it is. If you leave something on a bus or whatever, it's just too important. Things are too important to leave in the hands of fate. So yeah, that's that's probably the strongest way I can think of to say that it's always worth your time spent thinking about backups and redundancy and all that, because even losing a Word document that you've put 3 or 4 hours into is devastating. I always work from Google Drive now, just because I know that I can close it and reopen it and it's all going to be there. So anyways, just some food for thought. And when companies are working on video games or whatever, they all work from a central repository, and use source control software to check out different things to different people, and things are getting better. Things are getting more intelligent now, whereas before people would always do things in a riskier way, and even in the day of film and everything. Not that I really have much experience with all that, but everything was on tape, so of course rolls of tape were lost. Music videos were shot again. The Smashing Pumpkins had to shoot another music video because they lost the reels of the video. Films had to be reshot. Tarkovsky had to reshoot the burning of the house scene in The Sacrifice, which ultimately killed him. He just worked himself into an early grave. So yeah, anyway, there you go. That's my spiel for always have a backup.
Do you recommend on the drive more than hard drive?
Always have, external hard drive. So for me, I like to have, I've got one Lacy drive that's literally a system drive that is a duplication of this laptop. I also have another drive that's just me dragging the folders in. So depending on how bad the situation is, I can either just bring the project folders back in, or I can just restore the system image. So every week I will try and remember to do that system image. So if I ever have like a catastrophic issue with this laptop, for example, at the very worst, I'll only have ever lost best part of a week's work, as long as I do that every week. I mean, it's quite OCD thinking, but you know, it's just a rule that when you don't have the systems in place, that's when you get hit. So at least when you've got systems in place, you can say, well, look, I did everything I could. I only lost a few days of work. So yeah, like if you're working on something really important, it's always good to back it up and to spend some time understanding how the kind of file management thing works. Okay, so I have bought myself enough time there for the tracking to work. So now you can see that the video has all these tracking points that move somewhat intelligently with the content of the video. And you can see there's so much stuff here. It's taking so many tracking points from all of the things there. And it struggles a bit with other areas. Like look at the ground, it's not able to take that many from the ground because it's less well defined. Like there's less pixels that are kind of unique, I suppose. And here it gets a bit better. So what we're going to do here, what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and put some arrows on the ground, maybe here, to kind of like indicate like walk this way, and we're going to try and make it 3D. So the effect that it has is kind of augmented reality. It looks like something that you might do in Unreal, but After Effects can do to some extent these things as well. Okay, so to do this, we're going to make, let's see, going to make a new composition. Let me just show you the arrows that we're going to drop on there. So there's just a very straightforward arrow. Like this has transparency, by the way. I think it does anyway. So yeah, there's an arrow, and we're going to try and overlay some arrows on the ground just to show us where we're going. So we're going to make a new composition, and normally the width is 1920 by 1080, but this time we're going to go 1080 by 1920 to make it like a super tall, composition. And I'm going to name this arrows. Okay, so I forgot to get my arrows. The PNG needs to be dropped into the into After Effects project panel, and then I should be able to just drop the arrows on that composition. And it doesn't look very good. The reason being is because the default composition background color is black, even if there's nothing there. So I can use the transparency button to actually see what's going on. And then I can press W and I can rotate. And if I hold Shift, I believe, it rotates in 45-degree increments, which is nice. And back to the V tool, I should be able to scale it up or scale it down. And holding Alt helps keep it in its aspect ratio. All right, so what should we do with this? So we're going to have these arrows just kind of moving upwards. So I'm gonna actually start off with the arrow off the bottom here. Let's just press P and just have a little play, just so that we know what we're doing here, because we're going to be keyframing the position here. So we're going to have it go jump, and kind of come in into our sidewalk. So yeah, I'm going to start off with it off the bottom. I'm going to press the stopwatch, and then I'm going to go on like a few seconds, maybe just 2 seconds. And then I'm going to move it into the composition so that it just goes zoom and it comes in over 2 seconds. Okay, and again, I'm going to easy ease these to make them a bit smoother. And we can go into the keyframe editor and we can have it ramp a bit more quickly at the start, like I said before. Have it a bit more snappier. And then it slowly comes to a halt. Okay. If I press Shift T, I get the opacity. That was the shortcut that I was looking for before. I forgot the shortcut for it. So you can see the opacity is at 100 here. And I'm going to press the stopwatch here so that it's 100 when it stops. But I'm going to go back to the start and maybe go down to 0 so that it appears to kind of fade in like that. How about that? Just helps a bit. And again, you can ease those keyframes if you want. And we're going to start duplicating this. So it's good to do whatever you want to do to the individual thing before you start duplicating it, because otherwise, of course, you're going to have to go through all the duplicates and mess with their opacity. So it's easier to do things before you go off duplicating a lot. I'll go to 4 seconds and I'll trim it by pressing Alt bracket. And I'll do another opacity keyframe and have it fade out before it cuts off, right? Because you don't want things cutting off on the screen. So there we go. It moves up into the composition, it fades to 100%, it stops, and then it fades away.
How can you make the position and the capacity show up at the same time so you can see the keyframe? Because when I click T,
Yeah.
position 1 changes to opacity, so all of the keyframes I know that can't see them anymore.
Oh yeah, they should still be there.
Yeah, they're still there,
Use the shortcut to show all keyframes of a layer.
what's that shortcut? Sorry?
U.
Yeah. I inadvertently pressed on O because thinking it's going to bring opacity. Now I've lost my timeline line.
That happened to me before. Just undo that. Just Command Z.
I think I've done too many things into
Nothing's been lost or anything. It's just a view that's changed. So you can always double click your arrows composition in the project panel if you get lost, and it should kind of fix itself.
okay.
But Shift T is the one. And I might just put a effect on this, perhaps. I'll drop a fill effect on there because it should be green, shouldn't it, really? So generate fill. And then I can change the color to make it green. All right, so next step is just to duplicate it a few times, maybe twice. And just move the duplicates along the timeline just so that it loops, basically. We're kind of making a little loop. So 1, 2, 3 little loops of it. Could do 4 if you want to. So it just plays for 2 seconds, like 2, 4, 6, 8. No, sorry, 4, 8, 12, 16. 16 seconds is four of mine, because each one is 4 seconds, but it doesn't matter.
You show us how you just selected like a bit of the timeline and then moved it. That second. How did you?
Yeah, just click on these. Once you've got it duplicated, you might not have the bit trimmed.
I trimmed it, but I can't select and move. Or is it? Oh yeah, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
I got it. You're right. Actually, I mean, I was on like on a different thing, and I didn't even notice. Like up there, you know.
Yeah. Like Premiere doesn't hurt you too much when you're not in the right area or whatever, but After Effects, it really is. It's like Photoshop. It's just that level of kind of pain when things aren't selected. But it's not so bad. Usually undoing and kind of going back to the composition is usually the best way to kind of find where you are. Okay, I'm going to duplicate all of them this time. Lots of duplicating. I should be able to just select them all and press Command D. And I want to get the duplicate ones to the top so I can like treat them differently. So I'm going to just drag all the duplicate ones just to the top of the layer stack, so that, yeah, it looks like that. And I'm going to make a new null object and select the duplicates again by using click and then shift click the fourth one. And I can pick whip any of the duplicates to the null. Hopefully you've got that.
All of them or any one, just one?
Just one of them, because you've got them all selected, so it's going to apply to all of them. Every time you do a pick whip thing, you know something fun's going to happen. And now all of those 4 PNGs have the parent set to null, which is nice. So I can click on the null and I can use P and I can change. Let me just move it along. I can change the position of the null. So everything inside the null gets moved up along. And if you wanted to, you could do that process again. And I can make another null. And obviously, you know, just have more more arrows. So now I've got like three different kind of groups of arrows, if you like, all coming and going at the same time. There's a bit of room for improvement because my bottom arrow, stupidly, is kind of off the bottom of the screen, so I'm going to try and fix that. So yeah, something along the lines of that. And all right, so that's quite a fun little thing. Going to go back to the original composition. So not the arrows, but back in the project panel, we can double click on the video composition. And where is the tracking gone? Yeah, so I just have to go back into the effect. I have to go back into the effect control tab and click on the 3D camera tracker to view those tracking points again, because they need to be selected, if you like, for the next bit, because we're going to want to generate a tracking point on the ground. So there's a bit of the video here where no one walks on the ground for a few seconds, and then this guy with the shopping bag comes in. So why don't we try? Oh, it's a bit tricky because those tracking points are coming and going. Anyway, we'll just see how this goes. I'm not saying that this is the best application of these things. I'm just trying to give you a vague idea of how they might work. So we can actually select a space on the ground, and it triangulates what it thinks is the target. We can right-click that, and we create a solid. And the reason that it says "and camera" is because it needs to create like a 3D camera in order to create these kind of 3D objects, if you like. So the one that we want is create solid. And we can ignore the camera, but we're interested in the solid that now has like a blue a blue shape. So with the solid selected, we can use W and V. So W is rotate, and this is kind of where it starts to feel a bit like Unreal. We can more or less map out the kind of plane that we're looking to put the arrows on. It's like a big rug. More or less, we're just kind of sketching in where we want those arrows to go. And the next bit is fun. We go back to the project panel. We're going to drag this arrow composition that we did, and it doesn't really matter if yours doesn't look like mine, but we're going to drag that onto this layer here, but we're going to hold Alt before we release the arrow composition. So click and drag, don't release it yet. Hold Alt, and then when you release it, doesn't look right. Yeah.
Yours looks better than like it was not what we've got over here.
So yeah, I mean, I'm going to undo this and maybe don't have such a stretchy layer, make it a bit easier to see. And also, like, you can notice straight away that the timing isn't right. So one thing that I need to do here would be to obviously select everything on the timeline and just move it down because it's starting too early.
Is the idea that this composition is supposed to project onto the figure, onto the blue?
Yeah, yeah.
It won't go anywhere else.
So it's a bit with a bit of trial and error we can figure out what's going on. But essentially, the arrow composition, if we hold Alt, click and drag the arrow composition down onto the blue solid, it should do something like that. Any joy?
I lost all the trackings in mind when you were doing that.
Ah, you probably didn't lose it.
Yeah, I think I just missed how to get.
Yeah, you just need to, in the Istanbul composition, you just need to go find the tab where it says Effect Control. With the video, and here, like, here we are again. It's always the trick to select the thing in question, then click Effect Controls, then click 3D Camera Tracker. I made that mistake constantly. But yeah, it does take a little while to do that. I don't know if it's going to put a second camera tracker effect on, or if it's just going to replace the effect that's already on there.
How do you select the solid after you create it? It's down there in the content. Select it on the laminate. Right. So in my case, I mean, the arrow thing shows in the content, but it doesn't show on the image. It's there, but you can't see it on the image.
So, yeah, I had to go back to my arrows and make it start at 16 seconds. I didn't really tell you that, but we don't get to that point in the video until 16 seconds. So I had to go back into my arrows and move everything to the 16-second point.
And you move them by just selecting everything?
Yeah, just drag it.
It's really
Just drag it on the timeline. So maybe some basic things that we can do to maybe improve the arrows. Well, mine are looking a bit stretched. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's just because the solid is a bit stretched. So you can change that. You can just make them bigger maybe. Sometimes we want to change the way something blends with the underlying video. So we want to change the blend mode of the arrows, in this case to overlay. There's a lot of different options. You can almost just try different ones to see what they do. But in this case, an overlay one will give a bit of the underlying ground. Like it changes the kind of opacity. If you don't have that blend mode in your track on the timeline, there's a little button that says toggle switches modes at the bottom that you can check, and it appears. So we can make it overlay and we can have it just a bit more sitting in the environment. Because we have the arrows as one composition, we can apply an effect on there and it will treat it all as one piece of video, if you like. So that's the reason that we do pre-comps, is that we can do things to that pre-comp that affect everything inside it. And we still have access to everything inside it. So for example, we can try this little echo effect, and we can make a few different echoes, and we can have a play with it. It's probably not going to work very well, but just it's always good fun to try things and see how bad they look. That's kind of weird. Okay, have you all got some sort of thing going on? Any arrows on your screens? So how's your arrow composition looking?
It looks great on its own, but is it dragging on? So you press Alt and no, it doesn't look great at all.
Yeah. Alt and drag it onto the solid.
Actually, now that I moved the time thing, I can't even see my arrow composition.
Did you manage to create the solid okay from the tracking points on the ground? Yeah?
The solid is there. But since I moved the arrow composition back in the timeline, now it's disappeared.
So let me just go back a bit here and do this with you again, because I may have just skipped through. So it sounds like this is the point that things are going a bit wrong. You've got the blue solid, and that's in your original composition, which is called Istanbul after the containing video. You've got access to the arrows composition in the project panel, and the arrows composition isn't part of the Istanbul composition. But if you alt drag that arrow composition directly onto the solid, it replaces the solid.
Now I have arrows, but it has nothing to do with the solid.
Have you not dragged them onto the solid there as a separate thing? So get rid of them from the timeline.
Okay, and then say that,
And then drag them in from there, holding down Alt onto there.
onto the track thing.
I think maybe that needs to be selected at the time, so click that now, drag Alt onto there.
Ah, brilliant. Okay.
Cool. So here's a question for you. What would happen? Let me actually show you, let me intentionally make a bit of a mistake here and just ask you what you think the solution might be. Maybe my arrows are just generating too quickly, and there's like a person walking all over my arrows. So so here we can see that the arrow is ruined by the guy's hand, and that takes away from our enjoyment of what's happening. So think back to the lower straps, the lower, whatever you want to call it, the little wine thing that we did. How did we hide the text and carefully control that as the video is playing back? Well, we made a composition out of it, And when you've got a composition selected, the draw rectangle tool becomes a mask tool. See that? In fact, we can use any tool to draw a mask, and I'm not that good at this, so don't expect too much here. But we're able to basically draw masks on. Maybe just keep it simple with the rectangle tool. We can draw a mask on, and then the mask has a path. Whoops. The mask path, I should be able to, yeah, I can change the mask path with a bit of messing around. And this is the same in Premiere. So the solution is that you have to go through more or less frame by frame. And this is where the shortcuts are really useful. So page up and page down. Let's put a stopwatch on the mask path, and then I can use shift page up and page down to go through, or maybe just page up and page down one frame at a time if you want it to be super accurate. And I should be able to, if I zoom in here, you can see that when I go through, I can adjust the mask path frame by frame. So that I can make it look like his hand is affecting the mask. It's quite nice. And it takes a bit of time, but not if you use the shortcuts. It's pretty quick process. And we can also feather out the mask path a bit so that the edge isn't so hard. So if I add a bit of feathering here, it looks nicer. So with a bit of masking, and remember, masking is basically using the rectangle tool on top of a pre-composition, we can create really nice little moments. So I've not done it here, but I've done it for when his hand moves, and we'll just have a little play, see what it looks like. I mean, it's not it's not perfect by any means, but it helps, and the more time we spend doing that, the more we can refine it, and we can make it look like that is really in that scene happening there and then. So yeah, I don't want to spend too much time. I just wanted to show you that you can do that using page up and page down. So that's basically it in terms of that section. I've just got a couple more things. Yeah, we can try and do this kind of quickly, or you're welcome to just watch my screen. Actually, this won't take too long. With the video here selected, with the effect controls selected, we get to see our points. And let's just go to where we've got, let's go back to the Vodafone sign just because it's facing us. We can click on a point that's facing us. There's a nice triangulation. And we're going to, let's see, create text this time. And that's quite extreme, isn't it? So let's just sort that out.
I just forgot the beginning part of how you get that lead target thing.
So basically we had to select the video then make sure the effect control 3D camera tracker is selected. Yeah, so that we get the points. And of course we can change that text, you know, we can make it all different colors if we want to. We can make a nice border. We can add a, we can basically duplicate it and move it around and create a kind of shadow effect. So let's try this really quick. So if I duplicate it, text 2, I'm going to make that black, and I can put it like underneath, so it's like behind the first text. And let's see, I can use these arrows on. Let me just hide text 1 for a second. I'm just working on text 2. You can kind of like flatten it out using the W key, and using these XYZ controls you can change how it works. And I could maybe try a fast blur on text 2. Bring text 1 back, and I know that's slightly not working because the sign is actually blocking. I could make a new null and maybe just get both of them behaving to the null position, and then move them to the side. And it's not too bad. Now, again, there's too much stuff in this in the video for it to feel like it's really sitting properly on the ground. So it might even work better if it was on the other side, you know. But yeah, in the right situation, this can work really, really well. So hopefully you can see the potential of that. And what you could do, obviously, is create a pre-comp, and again you could, whoops, I'm not sure why that's disappearing. Yeah, maybe I'll have to come back to that one, but you should be able to mask it away. But when you see this used on videos, you can see that they sometimes use it, like they usually use it quite carefully, so that it's uninterrupted by some movement in the actual scene. So you can use it tastefully. You don't need to do any real masking. But yeah, you get the idea, hopefully, of that. Yeah, so the masking should work as long as it's a pre-comp, but no worries. I might skip the next part, which is drawing sprite lines on the video. So you see it a lot on like kind of promo or dancing videos where little green or red lines kind of squiggly around the place and jump and dance around the screen. That's relatively easy to do, but I think I'll skip that one for the sake of time, and I'll go on to doing a bit of just a bit of rotoscoping basics, probably a bit easier than the stuff that we've already done. But yeah, just want to say that it is a bit tricky, it is a bit fiddly. But if you're interested in doing it, and as long as you're not giving yourself too difficult a video to do, like this one's pretty tricky because there's a lot of stuff in the way. If your video frame is quite clean, then you can make it work in quite a tasteful way. You don't want to be too ambitious because you'll be giving yourself too much of a technical challenge. But if you keep it fairly simple, it can work really, really well. So goodbye project, don't save. I'm going to bring in a video, the other video, which is a tutorial video on Reaper, which is really good in itself. But yeah, we're going to make a new composition from this new video, and we're only going to look at the first few seconds of it. So I'm just going to scrub to the last, this bit of it here. I'm going to reduce the bracket, and I'm going to right click and say trim comp to work area. So that's just the first 10 seconds. And I might do the same with the start of it. Just trim the in point, right click, trim comp to work area. Okay, so hopefully you've got a cache Thakar on your screen, and I just chose a nice tutorial of a nice friendly person with a fairly clean, fairly clean background. There is some stuff in the background though. So what we're going to do now is basically rotoscoping, which is make a layer from him, so that we can maybe put text behind him, in between him and the background. And this has all sorts of applications, but just so you know what rotoscoping is I think useful. So we're going to double click the video, and then you'll notice that it actually opens up in a layers, so like a separate layer view, which is important because we need to do this in the layer view. So the Roto tool we can reach by going Alt W. You can see it up here, so it's actually not too obvious that it's the Roto brush tool, but there it is. You get like a brush around a person. Next to the pin, yes, next to the pin. And once we have the Roto tool enabled, we should be able to change the size of it. Well, first of all, that's what it looks like. We're gonna start drawing shapes here. But to change the size of it, it's actually command on a Mac, command click and drag up and down, and it changes the size of the actual tool itself. We don't want it too big that it can't go through his neck. We're just going to draw out the rough shape, and yeah, so I'll just go for it. I'll just show you what it looks like. And we're just trying to include the details of some of the colors that are close to the edge, but we're not going over the edge. And there we go. I've released that, and it's done a really good job, except his ear. The grab tool, the hand tool is really useful here, which I sometimes just forget to click. Back to the Roto tool, little click here, and it fixes it. I will just make it smaller by command. And it makes sense that it didn't do the ear too well, because it just doesn't necessarily know that that's part of him. But yeah, just little subtle clicks will do the job. And on the other side, it's made a bit of an error with his hair and the black frame in the background. So in order to fix this, we actually just need to hold Alt, and it becomes a subtractive Roto tool. And we can tidy it up. Yeah, it's a bit tricky this, because it doesn't really know. This is very good. This is actually really good. When you think about what it's doing here, it's really impressive. And maybe if we kind of move to a bit of the video where his head isn't covering the border, it might be a bit easier for the software to separate those two elements. But let's not get too caught up in the detail right now. I just want to show you essentially that this tool works. Yeah, a bit tricky there, but we'll crack on nonetheless. What makes this work really well as well is the edge refine tool. So it's actually the second category of the Roto tool. And similarly, we can change the size of it by holding Command and clicking and moving up or down. And essentially what we do here is we go over the edge with as steady as hand as we can manage. Ooh. And it does a really great job of mixing the edge into the background, especially where hair is. And this is the thing that makes it believable when we start putting text and stuff behind it. So you don't want to skip this part of it. And we've got these buttons down here that help us see the accuracy of the mask that we've created. So it's pretty damn good. And you can see, look around the hair, you can see that it's incorporating in like kind of fabric elements. And yeah, that's how we can.
Can you use it instead of green screening?
Yep. Yep. I mean, green screening is obviously going to give you a certain type of result, but a lot of people are using this technique now because it's kind of getting better and better. Okay, so that's cool. And what we'll do now is bring the original video back in underneath this. I've just realized I made a slight error in the sense that I kind of moved and cropped I moved and cropped the video. You know, I probably shouldn't have done that because obviously now I've got the original video in there. So there's the roto layer. The original video, I kind of moved, didn't I top and tail it, but I'm trying to bring in the original video as like a duplicate. So I'll just quickly see if I can eyeball these together so that they're frame accurate with each other. Yeah, I think, let's just go with that. I think they're frame accurate. I don't know, but yeah, I shouldn't have cropped the original video in the first place if you're going to duplicate. That's an example, I suppose, of how sometimes when you need to work with layers, and if you need to think about later on that you're going to be working with a duplicate of that layer, and if you do something or not, you might make things trickier for yourself. Anyways. Add in a bit of text. Hey. Sorry, I'm just having a little text moment. All right, so yeah, basically that's, oh yeah, you can see my two video layers are slightly out of whack, but that's just my own fault. Apologies. Like I say, I shouldn't have done that little kind of crop. Ooh, I think I moved it the wrong way. I'll just try and improve that. yeah, bit fiddly. Once if you make a mistake, you try and fix it. It can be a bit fiddly. It's more or less in near the start, but it kind of goes out by a few frames. I'll just try and move this maybe in time, see if it matches. Yeah, it's just... Oh, cool. There we go. More or less. The head seems a bit off, a few frames. Great. Okay, cool. Glad I got that sorted because it was a bit annoying. Cool. Alrighty. So now you can see basically what rotoscoping is. And you can use that in all sorts of situations. And that is a dynamic mask, if you like. That's really cool because you can see that was relatively fast to do. And now it just knows that there's one layer being him and the second layer being everything behind him. So this is the layer behind, and you can see that the text sits in between the two layers. So I hope you find that useful, just to be aware of rotoscoping, and it's easier now than it's ever been before. It's just using the roto brush tool and then refining the edge, and then you can, as long as you are aware that After Effects shows you stuff one on top of the other, you can put whatever you want to in between those layers, or you could just decide to use this as an alternative to keying altogether. So pretty cool. And we're getting a bit of noise on the edge there, but considering how quickly we did that, I think the result is pretty good. And we could feather that out a bit more, but yeah, no need to go too granular now because we've already gone past 12 o'clock. Great. So I hope that gives you a bit of, I suppose, not just After Effects specific knowledge, but more general knowledge about what are the sorts of things you can do with a 2D video in software like this without having to go to that kind of extreme Unreal Engine level of things, which is a whole different level of pain. Depending on what you're trying to do, you can think a bit differently about what it is that you're doing, and you can maybe factor in some of these things into what you're filming, for example. It might change how you film.